Welcome, Caleb.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
I trust that Birmingham is treating you well.
So far, yeah, I'm slowly becoming one of the godfathers of the city. Being here for over 20 years.
Over 20 years in Birmingham.
Over 20 years, that's right.
Okay.
So I think every road and cul-de-sac in the city, I'm quite used to every part of the city now.
They need to give you the keys to the city.
They need to. I'm waiting for the day when the Queen herself comes and says, "There you go."
And I think you're being in the UK, in Birmingham, for that long puts you in a very unique position where you understand the issues that the second generation is dealing with.
Yeah.
Because you've come from there. Start with yourself, and then we go to the work.
Yeah. Okay, myself. So as my good friend Dr. Harvey's already mentioned, Caleb, that's my name. I've been in Birmingham for over 20. Let's put it that way. And I finished my GCSEs, A-levels, college, did some other studies, went on to university. I went to Wolverhampton, by the way, first to do some film and media stuff. I left that one halfway through and went on to theology. Did my bachelor's, master's, MPhil rather, and then my PhD. So
those was at Birmingham?
No. So my bachelor's was with Bangor, but through Mattersey Hall.
Okay.
It was through Mattersey Hall. And then when I finished my bachelor's there, thank God with the first, I went on to Cliff. I went to Cliff College, of course, accredited by Manchester. So I went to Cliff to do my MPhil, which after the MPhil, I did well, supervised, was pleased. And they had wanted to enroll me on a PhD, but after I finished with my MPhil, I decided to stay home in Birmingham, and I went over to Prof. Anderson, who was happy to supervise a PhD, my PhD journey. And it's interesting because Professor Anderson supervised my dad's PhD. And at the time when Dad was doing his PhD, I had no idea what a PhD was. We just saw the man reading books after books after books. And I think I was finishing GCSEs or college at that time. So all I was interested in was just playing football and messing about, just doing what teenagers do.
Sure.
Until I met the great Allan Anderson again, and I said, well, I'm back here again with you, sir, but this time I want to do my own PhD, my own research. And it was a great journey. It was a very good journey with him. Yeah.
Brilliant.
He called me the radical one. He called me the radical Pentecostal. So that was Calvin.
It's unfortunate he's retired.
Yes.
He could have retired. He could have supervised your son.
That's right. It would have been amazing. 3 generations.
And you're working at Sparkbrook Church.
Yes, that's right. So at the moment, I'm a Sparkbrook. I've been there for a while. About 10 years or so now. So that's where I pastor a local church there in Sparkbrook. It's an Elim church. And that's where I pastor as well. And so that's the church side, yes. And then, of course, you probably would ask, but while I pastor the church, I also work at the Birmingham Christian College.
Sure.
As the academic dean at the moment.
Can you say something about the Birmingham Christian College? A lot of people remember it as Birmingham Christian College before it became the Church of Pentecost College.
That's right, yeah. So yes, the Birmingham College, the Church of Pentecost took over, I think it's 6 or 7 years now after sort of the old college went through a phase and had to close. And then the Church of Pentecost took over 6, 7 years ago. So we've been here. We've been part of the journey. Yourself, you've been part of the journey of BCC for many years. And And thankfully, with of course the hard work and the grace of God, we have just got our accreditation with Newman University, which is now we completed. We've gone through the whole process, and so we're fully accredited college now offering bachelors in theology. So we're doing leadership, church leadership, and missional leadership. And those are the two tracks that we're offering from this September 2020. So yeah, BCC has gone through a lot of changes, both structurally, academically, and then infrastructure-wise. The place is also changed a lot. So if anybody's watching, listening, who knows or knew of BCC, come in and have a look, because there's a lot of changes, and there are good changes
now.
Yeah, different place now.
And of course, just for our listeners, Birmingham Christian College is what was the Crowther Hall.
That's right.
That was run by CMS for quite some time.
Yes.
Training missionaries to go to Africa.
That's right.
Now the Church of Pentecost is training African missionaries to work in Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's get to your PhD work. What was the journey like?
It was an interesting journey. I think when, even though my dad had done it and a few friends had done it, I think they heard that where's the crown knows how the crown, how heavy the crown is. Yes. And so unless you've actually walked, in that journey, you don't really know exactly how it is. But thankfully, I remember when I was starting, yourself, you're around. Another good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Lord, the principal here, is always been around. My own dad, who was been through the journey, so in terms of advice, help, and support, I wasn't short of that. But of course, there were moments where you just feel a bit lonely. You feel a bit lost in there, because you get so much information, and then you read so much, and then you're thinking, okay, where do I stand? Where do I go? I thought it was this, but now I'm not sure. And then, of course, I'm sure everybody who's gone through the PhD journey will have those moments where you go sit in a library from morning till night, and you've only done 200 words.
Yeah.
And then you come back home, and family's asking, how did you get on? 200. Yeah. And they look at you and go, are you crazy? You've wasted the whole day, 200 words,
Yeah.
But, all those moments count, because they're part of the journey.
Sure.
And I remember one advice, that a good friend gave me, that good friend incidentally happened to be of yourself. When I first started, he said, keep reading and keep writing. And that's the advice I give to students now when I meet them doing a research. Say, sure. This is an advice I got. Keep reading, keep writing, because no matter what, as long as you write something, sure. You come back to it and, edit it, chuck it, add new, take away, but sure. Keep reading and keep writing. And that helped me through.
How did you come to decide on the subject of your research or your research question?
Yeah, so that was a very interesting one. I think at the very start of the research, I give a brief background on that. When we first came here, when I first came to join my parents here in the UK, there was no Church of Pentecost in Birmingham. There was no branch in Birmingham at the time. And so we'd go to London and fellowship with the Church of Pentecost from time to time while we're still here with the Elim Church. So I made friends there and started that sort of conversation there before we started the Church of Pentecost in our house, in the student house in Birmingham. And so the thesis, really, the problem came to me towards the end of my MPhil, because when I was doing my MPhil on the spirit practices and baptism of the Holy Spirit and practices and the implications of it in the Church of Pentecost in the UK, I realized I was mainly talking to the adults, the first generation. And so I got to a point where I thought, hang on, where are my mates? Where are the guys that I used to, see in London when I used to go to church there? And even though I kept in touch with some of them, because, as time goes on, you lose some friends, you gain more or others. I actually realized that half of them had left the church.
Okay.
And these were guys that we used to go to youth meetings with. So when there were the occasional youth conferences, youth weekends, when I traveled down to London, these are the guys I'll be, in the youth language chilling with, in that sense. And they're gone. So towards the end of my MPhil, that became a huge burden, in terms of why have they gone? And where are they? And so that became sort of the idea, that the problem that I wanted to go and dig out more, find out what is happening to them, and then by default find out what is happening to the youth in the church. And so the actual thesis title was a bit difficult trying to shape the title, because I struggled through the first couple of years. There was an element of the spirit, because when I started the conversations, the young folk were, they kept saying that the parents keep talking about the spirit and they're praying about the evil spirit, and so that spirit factor was very strong in the conversations. The adults, the first generation, would always also make references to the spirit on nearly everything. So I knew the spirit was key, so the spirit had to come in there, and the focus was the second generation as well. So my MPhil was the first generation, and then the PhD research was the second generation. So I combined both, and hence spirit, the spirit and transition, second generation Pentecostals from the Church of Pentecost.
All right. So what did you find?
What did I find? I found that even though most of the people that I sort of grew up with had left, and that was a fact, because these were people I knew personally, so it wasn't a third-hand, second-hand information.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that it was difficult to actually trace overall in the Church of Pentecost in UK how many people have left. That is because the overall statistics of the church is constantly increasing. So year on after year, in fact, since I finished my thesis 2 years ago now, I last checked, and the stats, the church is grown. So the numbers are still increasing. What is interesting is the increase of numbers do not reflect those who are leaving. And so, for example, you have, if you took the report on the face value, is great, because everybody wants increase. But then if you took, for example, one local parish, and then you ask the pastor there or the elders there, how many of these are new converts? Most often the answer is none.
Okay.
So the growth has come about as mainly because of migration. So a lot of folk coming from Italy, from Belgium, Holland, etc. Now, in there you will see that there are youth, and there are teenagers. There are names of people who have stopped coming to church, but their names are still on there. And the reason is that they are still praying for them, and they are still chasing them to come back.
Okay.
I'm not sure at what point they actually strike the name off, because these young people, their parents are still in the church, and their parents don't even want their names to be stricken off, because they are still praying for them. In their eyes, they are prodigal, they've gone, they will come back.
Okay.
But the interesting thing I found is this, that they haven't left the church, and they haven't left the faith. Let me put it that way. They haven't left the Christian faith. I didn't find one person who had left the Church of Pentecost who had left the faith, the Christian faith. all the people who had left in my research, I know others who have a different view, but in my research, all those who had left had actually gone to another church.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had actually gone to another church. And so in chapter 6, 7 of my work, I go into the secularization debate and discussion,
Sure.
where I say that for now, and I'm cautious because that's all it is. For now, the secularization debate is not affecting the COP second generation in a negative way for now. There's an interesting point, which is because following on from my work, I want to now go into the third generation, because that's a different thing altogether, and
Sure.
that's something that I'm going to start to look into. But the second generation are still very much in the faith, but just not in the parents' church, the Church of Pentecost. They go to other churches. So,
and did they give you reasons for this?
They did,
Sure.
and that was the interesting part. So this is where in the research I came across this word or expression called AF, AF,
Okay.
AF.
Okay.
and most of them just said the church is too AF. And so my follow-on question, of course, would be, what is AF?
Sure.
And none of them came with the same. So I didn't have two people come with the same definition of AF.
Okay.
But in general, what AF is they find elements in the church which they consider as too African.
Okay.
And does not reflect the culture and the society they live in Britain. So that is from the clothes that people may wear, their parents may wear. It may be the way the parents speak. It may be the language they use in prayer. It may be the way they dance and the way they preach. So the AF just comprises anything that is seen as too African to the point where you cannot identify with in Europe.
Really?
So that and that was a concept that was huge. I wasn't familiar with that until I started the research. And then it's like, oh, why don't you come to the church anymore? Oh, it's too AF, man. And then, for those who are in the church, you ask them, why are you frustrated in the church? Oh, because there's too many AF things going on. I said, what is the AF things? Explain the AF things going on. So even if the service is too long, it's because it's too AF. It's too African. And maybe one of the deacons or elders is spent 10 minutes, 15 minutes doing the announcements, the notices, which the youth are saying, we could have done that in a clip for 3 minutes.
Sure.
They could have sent that on our WhatsApp, on the Snapchat, on Instagram. So all these things that the church is not incorporating as much, they see the church as being AF. And it's frustrating them. So that was a key reason. I mean, the other thing was, of course, the spirit factor, which was, key, that the first generation parents, first generation ministers, the prayer topics, the preaching is mainly about the evil spirits. So for example, the Church of Pentecost, most of the churches have what they call prayer clinics. Okay. That is their prayer meetings. And
is this the one that happens on Monday mornings?
That's right, on Monday mornings, a lot of them on Monday mornings. Okay. Now, there are a few which happen on Tuesday and Wednesday in the different cities.
All right.
I know Coventry have theirs on a Wednesday, for example. Okay. So, and when you go there, it's full of first generation parents and members.
And is this idea of prayer clinics an import from Ghana?
It is an import from Ghana. Okay. The name is not necessarily from Ghana, but the idea of the idea of the prayer is from Ghana. I spoke to one of the national heads of the church who was here 6-7 years ago. He actually came up with that name. He started that sort of concept, the name from South Africa. but he's a Church of Pentecost minister. But the idea of praying those times,
Sure.
yeah. And when you go to most of the prayer meetings, it's full of first generation parents and leaders.
Sure.
And I asked the young people, why don't you go? And they said, well, it's not that we don't like prayer. And that's a very interesting thing, because when I go to the churches, the services which are predominantly second generation, they really do pray. And when I say they pray, with the sort of the same passion and, commitment that you see their parents praying.
Sure.
But they don't pray destroying the work of the evil spirits. So the reason they don't go to the prayer clinics as much is because most of the prayer topics are destroying the work of the evil spirit, destroying the work of the demons, and bombarding all the demonic activities.
Mm-hmm.
Brexit, when I was doing my research, Brexit was high on the agenda, as coronavirus is at the moment.
Sure.
Brexit was the main thing at the time. And some of them were frustrated that they were not having debates, about Brexit and which way should they vote and what should inform their, their voting decisions. It was more, praying and breaking the demonic forces, around Brexit.
Really?
So things like that were frustrating them. The sermons, the anecdotes that were being used were all
Sure.
references to Ghana, this river God. There's one thing that you find in most Church of Pentecost services during the worship, especially first generation worship, is the one leading the worship would almost make some reference. Remember how far the Lord has brought us when we were in the village without shoes, but by the grace of God, we are now here. Let us lift our hands and worship. And then you see the young people standing there thinking, the Lord has brought me far, but only from Clapham, only from, only from Wembley,
That's
so
right.
that, it's such references, and they're thinking, can we change some of these things, when, we've been, they're born here, they've been wearing shoes and
Sure.
flip-flops and trainers
Sure.
from when they were
Sure.
born, and they've got milk in the fridge when they want. So they are not connecting with how far the Lord has brought the first generation in terms of worship. So these things were, and another key thing I realized was leadership as well, mentoring, that the second generation did not feel that they were being empowered and mentored to lead the church. They felt that the parents felt that they were not ready. And indeed, when I spoke to some of the parents, that's the impression I got as well. But some of these second generation are managers, bank managers, and pharmacists, and they're leading and managing the big companies. Yet they are still not seen as ready to lead the church. And they found that very frustrating.
Okay. You said that the second generation is praying as passionately as their parents.
Yeah.
But they are not praying about the same issues that their parents are praying for.
No.
Or at least they're not praying against the demonic forces where their parents are focusing on them. So my question is, what then are the second generation praying for?
Yeah, that's a good point. The second generation folk, they pray on things that they call practical life. And so, for example, they're praying about what career paths that they need to take.
Okay.
They're praying about what universities that they need to go to. And so they bring all these sort of practical life issues into their prayer lives, which is absolutely wonderful. When you actually hear them pray, it's very different, because it's almost, Lord, I am at the point where I need to go to uni. Please help me. Which uni should I choose? Liverpool, Birmingham, Manchester. I need your help. I need your grace. And they are praying into these things. And then they also pray. You hear them praying for, Lord, how can we be, how can we help the homeless? I heard in one prayer meeting where I'd never heard a young lady, pray so passionately about helping the homeless. And this was one of the churches that I used as my focus in London, and she was passionate. So I had a chat with her afterwards, and she said, yeah, you know, Pastor, this is really something on my heart. We're not doing anything for our community. You know, when we come into church, we see the homeless not far from this church, and we're not helping them. So I just want God to give us the grace and the direction into knowing exactly how to help them. This is a prayer that I never heard any of the first generation pray.
Sure.
So the young people, there was another case where, again, another one was praying into about the environment. And she said, you know, what should be our response about climate change? Yeah, it says we're not talking about it, we're not doing it. Lord, help us. We need transformation to know what is your will about this. Where should we? So they are praying into these things that they actually going through.
Sure.
And they are not, you know, a few of them said specifically, said it's not that we don't believe in the demonic and in evil spirits, but we just don't think that they have the power to do anything unless God gives them. And actually, there's that line in the thesis, which is one of my favorite. I like that line so much because, you know, she said it right. Said it's not that we don't believe in a demonic, but we just don't think they got power to cause us any harm unless God allows them. So that is how different their prayer lines are. Whereas the parents, you know, when the microphones are not working, they are breaking the demonic influence on the microphone, which is not working. and the young folk are saying, no, you know, let's check the switch. Let's train one of us, take one of us to a sound engineering school. That's all it is. It's not about the demons. It's about training.
So how is the future looking, especially with the second generation believing and behaving the way it is doing?
When I started the research, halfway through, I was really worried about the future of the church.
Okay.
Coming towards the end, I think my worry turned into cautious optimism.
Okay.
And I say cautious optimism because I realized that the second generation still love the Lord. Okay. And they still are passionate about the faith, and they are finding, in fact, an article I've written recently on the second generation and the media. They are using the new forms of media to try and transform the way the church operates.
Sure.
If the first generation give them the room, and I think that really is where I'm cautious. So the optimism is that they still love the Lord. The cautiousness is, will they be given the room, the platform to do church and meet the contemporary society? If they are not given that room, then my fear is that the African diaspora church will be slowly shifting towards a decline, not in the sense of that Christianity will be declining, but the African diaspora church as it's known now. And maybe that's a good thing. I say that cautiously, that maybe that's a good thing.
Sure.
Because maybe it needs to decline for a new face of the church to arise. You know, that type of Christianity, that type of church need to give way to a new form of church. And I think this is where some of the second generation who are actually starting their own churches, you know, maybe breaking through. And then bigger churches like the Church of Pentecost, the Redeemed, etc., Lighthouse, they would need to be empowering the young people now in their churches to work alongside. I spoke to one young man a couple of weeks ago, and he put it in a very nice way. He said, we don't want our parents to sit down. We don't want them to step back. We just want to go alongside them. And I thought that was brilliant, because I was having that conversation with him in my car, and I said, what do you guys want? What do you second generation people want?
Sure.
And he said to me, he said, Pastor, we don't want our parents to sit down. They've got a lot to teach. They've got a lot to offer. We don't want them to step back. We just want them to bring us along them. So we want to go along them side by side, journey together, instead of them saying, you sit down, we are doing it, and then you are the future. They said, no, we don't want to be the future. We want to be the present with them.
Sure.
And I think that is the challenge. The churches who don't bring the second generation, the third generation along with them will struggle to exist as they're doing now. And that's the cautious optimism that I have, for the church.
And why do you think the parents are reluctant to do this?
I think there's an element of fear, fear that the second generation are going to change the church. But that fear hasn't got any grounding or foundation, because, as I said, the young people are still passionate. Of course, we know the youthful exuberance, which is, whether Christian or non-Christian, youth is youth. But then it's giving them that room to say, come alongside, let's do it together. And I kept hearing from the first generation, oh, they're not ready. And you'd be surprised some of the reasons they give up. For example, one young guy who was leading worship was wearing trainers, pair of trainers and jeans. And one of the deacons told me, because of that, they're not ready. He said, you see, this is what I mean. How can you be leading worship in a pair of trainers and jeans in the church? You see? So it was not the content of the worship. It was not, how the presence of God, filled the place and everybody was in awe of what was happening. For this guy, the youth is wearing jeans and trainers. And I said, so what do you expect the youth? He said, you've got to be in shirt and tie. I said, I agree. I said, I like my shirt and tie most Sundays. So I said, but do you mean that without shirt and tie, the Holy Spirit is absent from the church? and he goes, no, but the Spirit, when you dress up on a Sunday, the Spirit descends in a special way. So it's these sort of things that worries me in terms of when they say they're not ready, that the fears are not founded. The fears are not founded. They are very much personal opinions and preferences rather than strong theological emphasis. Because one of the things that I did find also, I made a point of in my thesis, was the sort of emerging pneumatology of the young people, where the Spirit is not just power to cast out demons, because for the first generation church, that is huge. It's power over demonic spirits. For the young people, it's power to engage in their daily activities. It's power to witness, to do missions. The missions that they're doing now is not necessarily standing in the markets and preaching, but they believe in sort of social friendly missions, social media missions. They're doing it in different ways that they believe the Spirit is still active there. And they are not receiving power to pray against demonic forces, but power to do missions in a new way, which the parents are not used to. Yeah.
I understand you did your research within the Church of Pentecost.
Yeah.
But by any chance, did you look at what else is happening outside the Church of Pentecost, in probably the RCCG and other churches? To do with second generation.
Yes, I did. So I looked at the RCCG, especially a couple of branches in Birmingham. I visited them, and they were very, 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 very helpful. Had a chat with the pastor. He allowed me to chat with have a conversation with some of the young people there. And the issues, not surprisingly, were very similar. Very, very similar, where the young people there, the RCCG, for example, the churches that I visited, they talked about, the lack of punctuality. And for them, the parents saying that the longer the service, the more powerful it is because the Holy Spirit is there.
Sure.
Yeah, and they were getting frustrated with those as well. I did, when I was doing my PhD, towards the end, I realized I came into the work of Rachel Adeboya, who also looked at religion and spirituality among the teenagers in the Redeemed Church in UK. Yeah,
Oh, really?
and that's right. So
Okay.
that was quite interesting, and her work is very interesting as well. So because she also came to that conclusion that these young people, they have a sound understanding of spirituality,
Sure.
just not in the way their parents, think it is. So Redeemed was the same. Lighthouse, I had a chat with some of the folk from Lighthouse. And then there were a couple of independent charismatic churches that I tapped into as well. One which is mainly Zimbabwean led. Another was Nigerian, mainly Nigerian, and then another Ghanaian.
Sure.
And the issues were very much the same. My one of my challenges was some of the senior pastors were still not waking up to, and I say that respectfully because I know some of them might be watching, to the fact that the young people are disengaged. Is because at the moment, the first generation, they are still in the church, still giving their tithes and offerings. But like I said to one of the pastors, I said, what will happen to your church in 5 to 10 years' time?
Sure.
I said, the influx, when that reduces, we're not getting as many people coming from Ghana now. They're coming from Europe.
Sure.
But I said, what will happen to their children? I said, what? And the question I asked most of the pastors is, what provisions, what resources do you have for the young people? And I said, when you're preaching, who do you have in mind? And that's usually the question that makes them stop for a while. Because I came to that myself in our own church, when I sat with the leaders at one point, and I said, when I'm preaching, who do you think I'm preaching to? Sure. And I brought some of the young people, because every now and then the young people go out, but sometimes they stay in there. Sure. And I asked them directly, I said, do you connect to my preaching? And they were very candid, and some of them said, yes, most of the time. Others says, no, sometimes we think you're preaching to the old people. That's how they put it. And then a few of them said, yes, sometimes we get it. And that transformed. So I became very conscious now that in my sermon preparations, the examples I'm using, the stories I'm using, are not only geared towards the older generation, but towards the young people who are in the church. So even if there's one person, I would make a conscious effort to cite an example that they can relate to.
Sure.
And that's the challenge with the leaders, that who are we preaching to in the churches? And that is key.
Sure. What suggestions do you have for the African church in Britain?
Yeah, it's for the African church. I cited the Book of Chronicles, the people who the men of Issachar. Yes. It says that the men of Issachar, they knew their time.
Yes.
They had to be released, and that scripture excites me because they list all the different tribes and what they were released to do.
Sure.
But for the men of Issachar, they were released to impact the people of their generation. And so one of the key recommendations I make in my work is, let's release the young people. They know their time. They know their time. Of course, there are some first generation people who know the time, and I don't I don't neglect or sort of reject that. But my point is, let us get those who know their time to engage with the people of their time, with the mentoring and the support of the first generation. So I talk about empowering the second generation to use the tools at their disposal to be the better Christians that God wants them to be today, and to be the missionaries that God wants them to be today also in the church. And then another thing that I mentioned also is contextualization.
Sure.
And so I talk about the effective and passionate, way that Africans pray. I said that is all good. Now let's contextualize it in terms of content and structure. So we're not saying we're going to pray less. The second generation are not going to pray less. They're going to pray even more. But then the content of prayer must change.
Sure.
And then I challenge the first generation to redefine the demonic in the West. You know, so Jesus said, "Go out and cast out demons." So I believe there are demons around, but the demons in the West are not the same demons in Africa. So if you want to exercise demons in the West, first you need to know where the demons are, what type of demons we're fighting against.
Sure.
But our prayer should not always be casting out demons from Africa in Europe. We need to find ways to make the gospel relevant today, to the church. So it's about empowering the young people, allowing the children, the men of Issachar today, the women of Issachar today in the West, who know their time, the season that we are in, to be doing it. And I mean, another thing, I know time is going, that I talk about is David and Saul. And so what David did was, David did not put on the armor of Saul to fight Goliath.
Sure.
He used the tools that he knew best. You see, so Saul gave him the armor and David tried it on. He says, "No, I can't. This is for your generation. It worked with you, Saul, but Goliath, I'll fight Goliath in a different way.
Sure.
I'll do it the way that I know." And of course, when he did it the way he knew, the foundation was, he said, "I come against you in the name of the Lord." So even though he took his stones and the sling, he still did not reject, he still did not refuse the importance of the Spirit of the Lord. So the second generation are fighting Goliath, but the first generation want them to fight Goliath today with their first generation armor. So I'm saying to the first generation, don't give us the armor. Just show us what the enemy is. Show us who the enemy is. We will put on the 21st century armor. Sure. And then in the name of the Lord, we'll win the fight. So that is another way that I put this across to the church today. That the church, the African Diaspora Church, needs to allow the second generation to put on the contemporary armor and fight Goliath. We'll defeat the enemy.
And in that sense, then, I mean, what you're arguing for is not just for the African first generation, second generation. It's for the whole body of Christ, right? That we understand that the next generation is going to deal with a different set of issues.
That's right.
From what we're dealing with now. And,
yes.
And we can't expect them to use our weapons.
No, we can't expect them to use our weapons. There are new weapons now. That we must allow them to use those new weapons.
Sure.
And for me, the crucial thing is the foundation, where Christ is the foundation, the Holy Spirit is active and is working. We've got different tools at our disposal.
Sure. Awesome. Can you name 3 African theologians who have shaped you, who are shaping you, who are speaking into the issues that you're wrestling with?
Yeah. In terms of the foundation of all this, I mean, my old man, has shaped me greatly, his works and his writings.
So that's Prof. Opoku Onyeina.
Opoku Onyeina, yes. Opoku Onyeina, he's got a huge repertoire of work from Pentecostal exorcism, spiritual warfare, such works really speaking to both the African and the Western context.
Sure.
So his work has shaped and is still shaping me a lot in terms of my thinking and approach. And this whole thing with the international worship centers, which he started in the Church of Pentecost, for example.
Oh, really? That was his work?
Yeah. He actually initiated the whole PIWBC concept.
Oh, brilliant.
That's right, yeah. And that's revolutionized the church completely. So, for example, if that is worked on properly, the church should be in a better place.
Sure.
And then our own Afe Adogame also.
Sure.
You know, his work is really helping, and it's helped and is shaping as well. I mean, the one on the African diaspora, you know, it's a massive one, and it's still helping.
Awesome.
It's good. And then after those two, there, I don't know if I can pick one, but you know, people like yourself, Harvey, you know, your work is increasingly becoming very important. You know, especially, you know, to those of us in the diaspora. So you know, I take my hat off to you with the work you're doing from the beginnings of missioafricanus. You know, your thesis that you published, Roots and Wings, I think is an excellent. I think that there needs to be a bigger volume of that one, and it's something that I'm proposing to work with you on. You know, because it's a huge, it's a brilliant piece of work, and I think that can be expanded so much. In that sense, so you know yourself, the work you're doing is absolutely immense. But my plea is we need more of yourself, myself in the diaspora to write. You know, when taking over the job here in the PCC, I'm struggling now, but I'm also making a conscious effort to find the balance between the college work and then writing. Because I think what's happened, I spoke to Chike Chigo a few months ago, and I said to him, I said you need to write more, sir, because you've got so much in you. He goes, oh, you know, the church work. I said, I'm caught up in that, but we need to write. You know, so I think we really need to write, because Professor Anderson has shaped my work and my theology a lot as well. You know, I know, yes, that, you know, whether we can claim him in that sense as African, you know, of course, the great work that he's done. So Professor Anderson's work is been immense. But I'm just conscious that we don't keep going back to the Prof. Anderson's, Andy Wells. They've done great work. You know, Professor Andrew Wells and all these, they've done great work. But I think we need a new generation.
I hear you.
I think we need a new generation of writers where all the Andrew Wells, Professor Anderson, Opoko Nyina, Professor Asamoah Gyedu, all of them, they've laid a solid foundation. Asamoah Gyedu is another one whose work really has impacted me. So you see, the list is endless. I'm struggling to pick three. But my point is, they have laid a foundation. I think we need this. There has to be this crop now coming through. Sheila, of course, you know, with the work that she's done and is doing, Sheila Kumia, that is, we need a new generation of writers now. And that's the challenge I think we need to pick up.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to talk with me.
No problem at all.
Anything else you would want to say before I let you go?
I think we've spoken a lot, you know, gone over time. But I will encourage my colleagues, friends, the African Diaspora Church. Let's keep doing it, and let's keep looking at ways that we can do it better. You know, in our contemporary society, that is very important. There's hope for the church. There's hope for the African Diaspora Church.
We have to be cautiously optimistic, as you've put it.
That's right.
We can't lose hope.
No.
We need to keep the hope alive. So
that's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.